Microphone check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Standing further away from the microphone. Check, check. Member mic check. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
30 seconds?
We're out tomorrow. You have a guide dog there, Ms. Brunson.
So it is the habit of this committee to run on a punctual time. I'm glad to see everybody here that we need, and the subcommittee will now come to order. Thank you all for joining us today. This morning we'll be discussing two bills that have been referred to the Subcommittee on Health and are sponsored by committee members from both sides of the aisle. I'm grateful to Representative Brian Mast and Representative Elizabeth Esty for working to ensure the Department of Veteran Affairs is best able to provide the high-quality care and services that our nation's veterans have earned and certainly deserve. The bills that we'll be discussing this morning seek to improve a veteran's ability to identify and utilize services available to them from the VA and from Congress. Representative Mast Bill, H.R. 5413, the Improving Veterans Access to Congressional Services Act of 2018, would make it easier for veterans to interact with their representatives by requiring VA to prescribe regulations allowing members of Congress to use space within a VA facility to meet with veteran constituents. This bill will build on a successful agreement in place since last year with a number of members, including Representative Mast and the West Palm Beach VA Medical Center. It would make it easier for the members in other districts to enter into similar agreements with their local VA facilities, and most importantly, benefit veterans by allowing for increased communication and on-the-ground resolution when constituent casework issues involving the VA arise. Representative Esty's bill, H.R. 6418, the VA Website Accessibility Act of 2018, would require VA to examine all websites, apps, attachments, and electronic forms to determine which are inaccessible to veterans with disabilities and develop a plan to make each of them accessible. The Blinded Veterans Association is going to testify today that visually impaired veterans, in particular, often face barriers to accessing information from the VA because they are directed to forms or pages that are incompatible with screen readers in violation of federal law, which requires agencies to make electronic information accessible to those with disabilities unless doing so would impose an undue burden. This bill would require the VA to take systematic action to address areas of inaccessibility and eliminate barriers to need VA information for veterans with visual impairments and other disabilities. Once again, I thank our two bill sponsors for introducing these proposals and for their attendance here today. I also thank the veteran service organizations who will be testifying or submitting statements for the record for their willingness to lend their opinions and expertise to this discussion this morning. I now yield to Ranking Member Brownlee for any opening statement that she may have.
Well, thank you, Dr. Dunn, and thank you for holding this legislative hearing. And I, too, want to thank our colleagues on the committee, Congressman Mast and Congresswoman Esty, for introducing these bills. It's always important to hear the concerns of various stakeholders as we draft and pass legislation and ways we can improve these bills. For that reason, I also appreciate each of the witnesses' ability to organize and submit remarks in such a short time frame. On Mr. Mast's bill specifically, which focuses on congressional offices operating in VA facilities, I'm open to the idea if there's space available and we're not taking away from patient care. In my district, for example, our local veteran service officer in our county, Ventura County, is interested in opening a field office in the Oxnard VA, which will be leasing a larger clinic in the coming years. I think these types of partnerships can help veterans, again, as long as we are not taking space away that could be caring for veterans. I would have liked to ask the VA about this issue today, but unfortunately the VA wasn't given adequate time to prepare their views on today's legislation. I believe that today's hearing would have benefited had we been able to learn the agency's position on these bills. With that said, I look forward to discussing the positions of our VSOs on these pieces of legislation and am hopeful we are able to incorporate those concerns into amendments to be offered in tomorrow's proceeding if we have one, which sounds like that might get postponed. So thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Brownlee. I'll now welcome our first panel, who will be our authors testifying from the dais. Speaking on their bills today are Congressman Brian Mast from the great state of Florida and Congresswoman Elizabeth Esty from Connecticut. Mr. Mast, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Dunn. Ranking Member Brownlee, I appreciate it. The opportunity to testify here before the House Veterans Subcommittee on Health on this legislation. I introduced it back in March of 2018, H.R. 5413, the Improving Veterans Access to Congressional Services Act. Now, my commitment, as I believe every member of this committee has the same commitment, is to help the end user of the VA be served every single day with dignity and honor that they've earned, the best possible experience every day going through the VA. Now, I firmly believe that in order to understand an issue best, you have to be present to see that issue day in and day out. I also believe that our veterans have to know that we care about things before they really care what it is that we know about the issues that we have to deal with, and it's why I still do, and I always will get every bit of my health care from the Department of Veterans Affairs personally. It's why, as an incredible pilot program, we opened the first ever congressional office inside of a VA hospital, the West Palm Beach VA Medical Center, last year. This office, it is probably smaller than the table that our panelists sit at, but its efforts have been far-reaching and tremendous. Having this office, I've experienced the good and the bad firsthand, but I also get the opportunity to see what is working well and what is not working, hear it from our veterans firsthand on a weekly basis. By opening up this office, my staff and I get to see week in, week out the daily operations of our VA facility, walking in the door every single week, walking past the same locations every single week, past the same offices every single week. We interact with our veterans daily. We receive positive and negative feedback on the operations of the facility in real time. When common threads or issues surface, I address it immediately with the hospital administration, which they have appreciated the fact that many veterans share their experiences with me, knowing that I'm a veteran, knowing that I'm a member of Congress, knowing that they're heard at the highest possible level, and they appreciate having that information shared with them as the hospital administrators. Additionally, when veterans have negative personal experiences at our VA facility, they know that they get to be heard by their member of Congress immediately. They can see their representative on their turf, where they're comfortable, where they believe that they are in a safe location for them, and they know that their representatives and their members of Congress and their government cares. They cry in that office. They get a hug from their representative in that office. They know that they're heard. To provide a bit of background and context on this office, we opened it for the first time on December 18, 2017. I share this office with 3 other members of the Florida delegation, Representatives Alcee Hastings, Lois Frankel, and Ted Deutsch. We all hold office hours there now. I try to personally be in that office on Mondays before I fly up here to Washington so that I can be there personally with those veterans and get that one-on-one time with them to hear about whatever it is they want to speak about. In 9 short months, this office has held over 400 meetings with our veterans and their families and their caregivers and opened up nearly 200 additional pieces of casework. The office has allowed me to expedite the assistance that I provide to our veterans and improve their overall quality of service that we deliver to each and every one of them. I truly believe that every member of Congress should at least have the opportunity to open an office in their local VA. The more present that members of Congress are, the better quality of service that our veterans can receive. Now, since our office opened in the VA, I've been approached by countless other members of Congress looking to replicate these efforts. It took me 8 months of administrating processing from the date that previous Secretary Shulkin gave me the commitment that we could open this office until it actually opened. I was happy to be the first through this door, and the lesson that we learned about the process of opening this congressional office in the VA should be simplified and institutionalized. That's why I introduced the Improving Veterans Access to Congressional Services Act to pave the way for our colleagues to open up their own VA office, their own congressional offices inside VA medical centers, and together we do what we do. We work to improve our veterans' access to us, to health care, to every service that it is that they need across the country. This legislation, it requires the Secretary of the Veterans Affairs to permit the use of VA facilities by members of Congress for the purpose of meeting with their veteran constituents. Additionally, it requires the Secretary to establish a standard operating procedure to facilitate and expedite these requests inside the VA facility. Chairman Dunn, Ranking Member Brownlee, and members of the committee, I appreciate the opportunity to testify on this legislation. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mass, for that passionate presentation. Ms. Esty, you're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Dunn, Ranking Member Brownlee, and my fellow members of the House Veterans Affairs Committee, I want to thank you for giving me the opportunity to testify today about my bill, H.R. 6418, the VA Website Accessibility Act of 2018. As the Ranking Member of the House Committee on Veterans Affairs, Disability Assistance and Memorial Affairs Subcommittee, I know all too well how many veterans live with the wounds of war. And according to the Blinded Veterans Association, and again, I want to thank Ms. Brunson for being with us here today, there are an estimated over 130,000 legally blind veterans in the United States and another 1.5 million veterans with low vision. These veterans require and deserve the same services and support as other veterans with disabilities. The needs and deservingness of the disabled veteran is reflected in law. Section 508 requires the VA website to be accessible to persons with disabilities. However, blind veterans currently face challenges accessing the VA websites and mobile applications, which are often the gateway to VA services and benefits. Navigating the VA's often complicated bureaucracy for the detailed information necessary to apply for VA benefits should not be doubly difficult for our visually impaired veterans. While assistance from a friend or a loved one can be invaluable, not every blind veteran has somebody available at all times to help them with the services and access they need for this critical information. And frankly, they shouldn't have to rely on someone else to get the services they need. Reader apps and other devices provide helpful support, but I have heard from blind veterans that they say these apps are not always supported and don't always work. Perhaps one of the most alarming instances of inadequate access to VA mobile apps was identified earlier this year when the VA updated the Veterans Crisis Line mobile app, but failed to verify that the update was Section 508 compliant. Visually impaired veterans were unable to access this vitally important mobile app, the Crisis Line. And when we have a crisis of military suicide and veteran suicide in this country, it's completely unacceptable that that wasn't checked. Thankfully, quick action by the Blinded Veterans Association, the staff of this committee, and calls to the VA corrected that unacceptable error. And I know that everyone on this committee and in this room shares the same goal of providing the best for all of our veterans, but we must not let this happen. That's why I introduced this bill, the VA Website Accessibility Act, which will require a study to determine the accessibility of the VA website and the mobile apps to ensure that they really truly function for all veterans with disabilities. It's very important that this Congress and the VA continue to ensure that all of our veterans, including those with visual impairments, have full access. Now, we're all aware federal law already requires this, but in fact, we know it's not working. Our commitment is not to have good intentions, is not to have laws in place, but actually make sure they're implemented in a way that functions for the people we're honored to serve. So again, I know everyone on this committee shares that commitment, and we owe it to all our veterans, including the blind and visually impaired, to ensure this access is real and available when they need it. I want to thank the VSOs here today for their suggestions. We've already talked some, and I know they're going to have some suggestions for us how to improve this legislation. I want to thank all of you for joining us here today. I want to thank the committee. Again, I I apologize, I have another committee going, as many of us do. But again, thank you for joining us. Thank you to the chairman and ranking member and my fellow colleagues on the committee. And I appreciate your assistance in making sure that the VA works for all veterans. Again, my thanks, and I yield back.
Thank you, Ms. Esty, and thank you for your diligent work on this bill. Once again, I'm grateful for both of you being here and for sponsoring bills on our agenda this morning. I will now welcome our second panel to the witness table, and we have joining us Ms. Melanie Brunson, Director of the Government Relations for the Blinded Veterans Association. Thank you, ma'am. Mr. Matthew Schuman, Director of the National Legislative Division of the American Legion, sir. And Jose Ramos, Legislative Director for the Wounded Warrior Project. We will begin with Ms. Brunson. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you. Thank you, Chairman Dunn. On behalf of the national officers and members of the Blinded Veterans Association, I want to thank you, Representative Ranking Member Brownlee, and all of the members of the Health Subcommittee for the opportunity to participate in this hearing. Both of the bills under consideration today offer thoughtful means of addressing significant needs of our nation's veterans. Because of the time constraints this morning, I would like to focus my comments on H.R. 6418. We thank Representative Esty for introducing this bill because it provides some practical steps that address some of the Blinded Veterans Association's most persistent concerns about the VA's compliance with Section 508 accessibility standards. Section 508 compliance is an issue that people throughout the VA generally agree is important. But at the same time, the issue never seems to rise to the level where it gets the attention of VA's leadership for any length of time. Having the VA Secretary compile a report on the current state of this compliance could help change that scenario. And with the recent rollout of the electronic medical record collaboration with Cerner, along with the focus on IT modernization across the VA, the Blinded Veterans Association believes the time for a new scenario is now. For this reason, we support H.R. 6418. Having said that, though, we would like to see some additional measures included that we think would strengthen the bill's effectiveness. We offer these for your consideration. First, in addition to directing the Secretary to develop a plan that addresses current accessibility shortfalls, we believe the plan should also include steps that will be taken to ensure that these shortfalls are not repeated in the future. Because all too often, the VA does not learn from its accessibility-related mistakes. Second, we suggest that the scope of this legislation, the report and the evaluation and the report called for in the bill should be broadened to include other items besides websites that are covered by Section 508, such as the inaccessible kiosks that have been deployed at VA facilities around the country, telehealth tools that are meant to be used in the homes of veterans but cannot be used by veterans who have visual impairments, and a variety of software and hardware that is meant for VA employees to use but is incompatible with the assistive technology that is used by VA employees who have disabilities. Including these items in the Secretary's evaluation and report would give both him and members of Congress a more accurate snapshot of the current state of VA's compliance with Section 508 accessibility standards. It would also give the Secretary more compelling reasons to develop a plan that is comprehensive in nature and provides long-term solutions rather than simply short-term fixes for present concerns. Finally, once this report is completed, we would like to see the members of Congress commit to hold the VA Secretary and his department accountable for taking the actions set forth in the bill. The Secretary's perspective on how to bring his department into compliance is certainly important, but it is just as important that this bill provide for congressional oversight of the department's response to the legislation, especially the content and implementation of the Secretary's plan of action. Knowing there will be such follow-through by Congress, we believe could impact the quality of the response from the VA and the subsequent report of the Secretary. Thank you for your consideration of these suggestions. I am now happy to answer any questions you may have.
We will take the questions at the end, if we may, and pass on to Mr. Schuman. You're now recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. The American Legion is adamant in ensuring both VA and our representative government is accessible to all veterans. The Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs has the authority to provide office space to members of Congress. This is the same authority that was used to open the office in West Palm Beach, but obtaining this authorization was an overwhelmingly complicated process. It took Congressman Mast more than 1 year to open the office space to be utilized for assisting local veteran constituents with obtaining their well-deserved health care benefits. These are incremental steps in the right direction, but there's still much work to be done. Chairman Dunn, Ranking Member Brownlee, Vice Ranking Member Takano, and Congressman Mast, distinguished members of this subcommittee, on behalf of National Commander Brett P. Rysted and the nearly 2 million members of the American Legion, I thank you for the opportunity to testify on H.R. 5413 and H.R. 6418. If signed into law, H.R. 5413, the Improving Veterans Access to Congressional Services Act of 2018, will direct the Secretary of the Department of Veterans Affairs to permit members of Congress to use VA facilities to meet with constituents in an attempt to increase and improve the access veterans have to their elected officials. Following an invitation to testify before this committee, the American Legion engaged the Florida delegations offices who share the space at the West Palm Beach VA Medical Center to learn more about the creation and day-to-day operations. The use of this potentially valuable resource appears to vary greatly among the members of Congress. The American Legion, with nearly 100 years of dedicated experience, can certainly see the potential value added to a member of Congress having visible office space within a VA facility, but we can also see the possible negative consequences. As an example, Congressman Mast himself often maintains a presence in the VA office, leading to a great success in engaging the veteran community, whereas other members sharing the space do not seem to have the same dedication to fulfill such a presence. The American Legion is not only concerned that VA will be required to provide space to congressional members, but that it may limit space available for other necessary services. Chairman Dunn, in order to support this bill, the American Legion calls on this committee to augment H.R. 5413 to create a pilot program with quantifiable criteria that will yield empirical data and show the potential efficacy of the legislation. This evidence-based approach will help to conclusively determine the value to all veterans. The American Legion applauds and appreciates the intentions, efforts, and leadership of Congressman Mast, particularly as a fellow veteran. His efforts, which we can all learn from, highlight the desire of a member of Congress who understands the value of firsthand engagement with veteran stakeholders in the VA healthcare system. The American Legion, the largest representative of those stakeholders, will continue researching and working with this committee, Congressman Mast, and our membership of wartime veterans to best serve those who have selflessly raised their right hands and taken the oath to protect this great nation. Separately, H.R. 6418 will direct the Secretary of Veterans Affairs to conduct a study regarding accessibility of websites at the Department of Veterans Affairs for individuals with disabilities. An accessible information technology system is one that is operated in a variety of ways and does not rely only on a single sense or user ability. Further, the VA Website Accessibility Act of 2018 requires VA to compile a list of non-compliant websites and submit a plan to this Congress to make sure those websites are finally compliant. The American Legion is thankful and applauds the leadership of Representative Esty for creating legislation which in time, Mr. Chairman, will assist VA in becoming more user-friendly to those veterans in need. In closing, the American Legion, just as this committee, believes in common sense, evidence-based solutions. Chairman Dunn, Ranking Member Brownlee, Vice Ranking Member Takano, Representative Custer, and Congressman Mast, I appreciate the opportunity to share with you today the position of the American Legion. I look forward to answering any questions you may have. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much, Mr. Schuman. Mr. Ramos, you are now recognized for 5 minutes.
Chairman Dunn, Ranking Member Brownlee, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting Wounded Warrior Project to testify today. My name is Jose Ramos, and I'm a legislative director for the Wounded Warrior Project. In 2004, while serving in Iraq as a member of a Marine sniper team, I was hit by a rocket and critically injured. When I returned to the United States, Wounded Warrior Project was there to assist me and my family, as they did with all other ill and injured service members. Over the last 14 years, I worked closely with the injured veteran community. I served on the Dole Shalala Committee, stood up the Congressional Increase Division for the Office of the Secretary of Defense, and served as an ambassador for the Military Paralympic Program. I'm honored to say that I am living proof of the positive outcomes Wounded Warrior Project has had on this community, and it is a privilege to speak to you today regarding the proposed legislation. In regard to H.R. 5413, Improving Access to Congressional Service Act, Wounded Warrior Project fully supports this legislation. Thousands of veterans turn to you and your staff with a broad spectrum of complex requests. You act as the ombudsman between your veteran constituents and the VA. Wounded Warrior Project is engaged with the veteran community in a different way. Our organization continues to be at the bedside of some of the nation's most critically injured, as well as through the delivery of a dozen free direct service programs to warriors and families in need. Wounded Warrior Project often finds itself advocating for critically injured and their caregivers while communicating with the VA and congressional staff. We believe creating a one-stop shop for advocacy and medical treatment makes sense. It alleviates the need for multiple trips to different locations and provides a holistic approach to address the needs of the most critically injured. Additionally, it would also provide congressional offices and their members the opportunity to interact more often with local veterans and caregivers within their communities to better understand the difficulties veterans face, as well as observe the challenges and successes at their local VAMCs. It is our hope that these congressional offices are used to conduct constituent outreach, to provide pertinent information to veteran populations, and above all, to allow Congress to learn from the veteran community they physically interact with in a common veteran focal point. Although we support this legislation, Wounded Warrior Project would like to caution Congress on a few aspects. First, the potential for misusing these offices as an inappropriate oversight tool. Second, the potential for new congressional staff to bypass already available resources because they are unaware of the VA process. Therefore, Wounded Warrior Project recommends that 1, the VA and Congress work together to create clear guidance determining what actions are acceptable at the locations, and 2, for the VA to develop an Introduction to Veteran Affairs class which outlines a clear VA advocacy chain of procedures which requires any individual working at a VAMC-based office to not only attend these classes, but also agree to properly direct veterans who ask for assistance to the appropriate VA entity. Lastly, Congress should be extremely sensitive to the perception of using veterans for political purpose, and therefore we strongly support the closing of VAMC's congressional offices during campaign season as outlined in the current shared state agreement being utilized at West Palm Beach VAMC. In regard to H.R. 6418, VA Website Accessibility Act, Wounded Warrior Project supports the intent of this legislation, but offers additional recommendations. Through the delivery of our programs and services, our goal is to increase access to community services and empower to achieve goals of living a more independent life. To empower warriors with physical or cognitive disabilities to live a more independent life, they will rely on web-based platforms to schedule VA appointments, seek information on programs, and communicate with their VA healthcare provider. Prior to passing H.R. 6418, Wounded Warrior Project recommends Congress receive a brief from the VA CIO The Department of Justice Civil Rights Division responsible for obtaining information on Section 508 compliance, and the Federal CIO Council Accessibility Committee on the status of ongoing efforts being conducted for VA IT systems to ensure that they're in compliance with Section 508. Any report produced should also include a strategic plan with stated timelines for fixing inaccessible websites to make them accessible for individuals with disabilities. Lastly, Congress should institute annual briefs to continue to monitor progress, including the ongoing electronic health record modernization efforts. I, on behalf of Wounded Warrior Project, thank the subcommittee and its distinguished members for the invitation to testify on the bills under consideration. I want to thank Representative Mast and Representative Etzi for their leadership, and I stand ready to answer any questions you may have. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Ramos. I now yield myself 5 minutes for questions. Mr. Schuman, you made reference to specific quantifiable criteria that will yield empirical data. Can you tell us what quantifiable criteria those are?
Well, thank you for the question, Mr. Chairman. That is something that we're more than willing to work with this committee, and certainly somebody here at the dais who has experience on this. We didn't want to create the arbitrary information ourselves. I think it would be critical to work with subject matter experts to know exactly what that would look like. As we've heard Congressman Mast testify, the number of cases that he's opened through this office, along with the number of engagements. We just want to be able to quantify that and see if it truly impacts. But additionally, there's 3 other members of Congress that utilize this space as well. We'd like to be able to receive the same data from them as well, just to truly understand the full scope and use of this beyond the physical member himself being there and learning what the staff is doing as well.
All right, thank you. I certainly understand the concerns about space constraints within the VA facilities, campuses. If space was not a concern at all in any of these facilities, would you have any reservations about 5413? And I'll just go right down the line. Ms. Brunson first.
No.
Thank you. Mr. Schuman.
I think we have other concerns with the bill beyond just space, Mr. Chairman, so we would be happy to look at that at that time.
Thank you. Mr. Ramos.
No.
Okay. Mr. Ramos, you made a comment about misused oversight bypassing internal VA advocacy. Have you actually witnessed any of that at the West Palm Beach Veterans Center?
Great question, Mr. Chairman, and the answer is we have not witnessed, but what our concern would be is if you have a new congressional staff member working at one of the EAMCs, that they would be unaware of maybe the services available, whether it's a patient advocacy or the local service advocacy through the VA. So that's why we recommend that some sort of tutorial class be implemented and that new staff or staff working there go through them so that they direct the veteran to the appropriate entity first so that they are not bypassing them.
No blowback on this yet. No problems.
No, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Brunson, do you think the Office of IT there at the VA has the needed authorities and abilities to address these noncompliance issues?
Yes.
Good.
The difficulty, of course, is that they haven't done so in a comprehensive manner. So what we see happening is the same mistakes are repeated over and over again. Oftentimes things are rolled out in a hurry, and it appears to us that sometimes the request for a determination as to whether something is 508 compliant is sort of a process that we know we're supposed to go through, but if they say it isn't, we implement it anyway because we're in a hurry to get it out, and we figure we'll fix it later. And in the meantime, a certain percentage of the population that the website is supposed to serve, or the app is supposed to be usable by, or the equipment is supposed to be for, cannot access it.
Do you know if there are any representatives from the Section 508 Compliance Office embedded in the IT, Office of IT at VA?
It is my well, the Section 508 office is under the IT office, and
So, yeah, then the entire 508 section is embedded in IT.
Yes.
How about that? Well, that concludes my questioning. Ranking Member Brownlee, do you have any questions?
Just very, very quickly, I first would like to thank Ms. Brunson for her advocacy. I shudder to think if you weren't on top of this compliant issue, it would be worse than it is. So I thank you for that. And I just wanted to ask, outside of simply the VA not making this a priority, what other barriers do you see with regards to compliance?
I'm not exactly sure what you're looking for.
Well, I think the main reason is that the VA just does not make this a priority, and so they're not focused on it. And so what I'm asking is there anything else other than that that is a barrier to the compliance?
Well, I think that the lack of focus manifests itself in a lot of different ways. I have had, in the time that I have been meeting with the Section 508, well, the IT office in particular, the same conversation over and over again about some of the issues that folks have, and every time we have the conversation, the response is the same, which is, wow, this is the first time I've heard that. And I know that's not true because I've had the same conversation with the same individual at a previous meeting. I think, for instance, I had a conversation in a meeting with other VSOs where we were getting an update on some of the IT modernization dealing with the ability to collect information for databases about veterans that would help make the electronic medical record more comprehensive. And they demonstrated a field that had been added to a particular database that would enable medical providers to collect information about someone's hearing impairment and whether or not they needed an interpreter. And they said, this is really a great step. And so I raised my hand and I said, well, that's great, but have you also included whether someone is visually impaired and might need to have medical information in an alternate format? And they hadn't thought about that one.
Thank you. And just, Mr. Schuman, I think you said in your comments, in your beginning comments, that the fact that Mr. Mass, it took him a year to make this partnership and this agreement happen in West Palm Beach, and I agree with that. I think that, partnerships really across the board within the VA is always time-consuming and difficult, and somehow we should be able to streamline those, because I think those, in many cases, those partnerships are going to help to better serve veterans. So, having said that, I'm not sure that there's, in the language, in the body of this bill, where there's a lot of language here to kind of streamline that process, and I think we need to attack that. But, having said that, and you said you've got a few more concerns other than space, and I think you've articulated that. Do you think the way the bill is written at this moment, understanding that I think we all agree with the spirit and the intent here, do you think the bill as written is ready to go to the floor to vote by the House?
Well, thank you for the question, Congressman. Short answer is no. We think there's more information that's still needed. I think, so the bill in the first place calls for an SOP, a standard operation procedure, to be created, and it's quite a while, particularly when the Secretary authorized it and it took 8 more months for that to happen is interesting, and it should have happened faster, in the opinion. But at the current form, there need to be some concerns that need to be addressed, I believe, before it would move to the floor, ma'am, in the American Legion's opinion.
Thank you. And lastly, Mr. Ramos, you had said space was the only issue, but I thought that the Wounded Warrior Project had also raised the Hatch Act as a concern around the bill. Is that still a concern, or?
Correct, ma'am. It is a concern. I believe it's addressed in the shared agreement that exists now, but it is a concern that we would have, not only the Hatch Act, but all the other concerns that we addressed during the oral testimony and our written.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
Thank you very much, Representative Brownlee. Representative Mast, you're recognized for 5 minutes.
I thank you all for speaking on this bill and for the concerns that you brought up. This is how we get to good legislation, is by having everybody be a part of the discussion, and so I appreciate your comments. I would like to ask a couple questions, beginning with you, Mr. Schuman. Do the VA hospitals have locations for shopping in them right now? You've seen one VA, you've seen one VA, but do VA hospitals have locations in them for shopping?
I'm not sure, sir.
Do you know if the West Palm Beach VA has a location in it for shopping?
I've never physically been to the West Palm Beach VA.
I can tell you that it does. It has quite a amount of space in there for shopping for various things, from blankets to pins to you name it. Would you rank shopping above advocacy?
No, sir.
Okay. Do VA locations, again, you've seen one VA, you've seen one VA, do VA locations of hospitals have locations for employee unions?
I'm not sure, sir.
Do you know if the West Palm Beach VA has a location inside of it for an employee union?
I do not, sir.
It does. I mentioned that my office space is about the size of that table there, maybe even smaller than that. The space for the employee union is probably close to half the size of this room, so quite a bit larger to employ for VA employee union duties. I would ask this, and this is just in response to some of the things that you said. Does impacting the life of one veteran make it worth it?
Indeed.
Absolutely. I would agree with you. You did also bring up saying that some members of Congress that I share this office space with have not taken the same amount of time. Would you like to share those numbers with the differences in time?
Certainly, sir. So we reached out to the other 3 members of Congress and received some feedback from the others. What we found is that your staff and yourself manage that office every day, your 1 day a week that you have available. And quite frankly, I think you would do it more if you had the ability to. The other offices sometimes maintain that office once a month compared to the one once a week. So that is some of the data that we got back from them, which is why we referenced that there are some that would not use it to the fullest capacity that you have, and I believe you would even use it more. To the other point that you raised is that space is critical, and I understand what you're saying. Advocacy is some would say is more important than a shopping space. I think our concern is that we want to make sure this is implemented correctly. We don't want to force the VA secretary to have to do it if they don't have the space. You say that if you've seen one VA, you've seen them all. I would disagree. I think many VA facilities are different. Look at the Denver VA, brand new today, compared to the one in Phoenix, Arizona, where I'm from. So they're slightly different. I'm not saying all of them have shopping centers, but I understand your argument there.
Yeah. My statement was actually, if you've seen one VA, you've seen one VA.
Oh, sorry, sir.
Yeah, they're not the same. They're all different. And I would just say, I would be perfectly happy to meet with our veterans in a boiler room if that's what it took to have appropriate advocacy for them. I would meet them wherever it is that they want to meet. I would like to go to you, Mr. Ramos, for a question as well. You spoke about needing some classes for staff of us as members of Congress, for our staff to understand how to appropriately advocate and the levels at which people are supposed to be seen. Do you speak to the VA administrator first? Do you go and speak to one of the VSOs? What are the, those channels and the order in which you're supposed to do them? Would you suggest that such a class exist for the staff of members of Congress now? Because we are dealing with all of the same issues. The difference is the convenience and the location where we are dealing with those issues and how quickly a veteran can access us. But we are still dealing with all of the exact same conversations that a constituent would want to come see us in some other facility. So that being said, would you advocate that we have a class just right now, just for our staff to address those same things?
That's a good question. And I believe OCLA has a guidebook for, but not a class. So the answer would be yes. But more importantly, for those working within an installation, because the concern would be that a veteran goes to a representative office and bypasses those. So it's just to reinforce that those entities within the VA exist and that they should go through that process first.
And that is an appropriate concern, and that is something that I would like you to know that my staff is educated in that and directs those constituents. These are the appropriate channels in which you're supposed to go through in order to address this issue. And I would just make one other comment, as it was brought about Hatch Act violations. I think the same concern can be brought about when you're talking about any congressional office anywhere. There is always a risk that some member of staff could dive into something political in a location that's meant very strictly for official work. That's a problem that can exist anywhere. No office anywhere in the country for any member of Congress is barred from that risk regardless of its location. I thank you for the time for answering my questions.
Thank you, Mr. Mast. Mr. Takano, do you wish to be recognized?
Yes.
You are recognized for 5 minutes.
Yes, Mr. Chairman. You know, for members of the panel, outside of embedding congressional offices outside of VA facilities, how can members of Congress improve access to have congressional services they offer?
Well, thank you for the question, Congressman. Quite frankly, I think thinking such as Mr. Mast has deployed is a step in the right direction, trying to find sort of target-rich environments for constituents in general, not just veteran constituents, is great. You'll find a lot of members of Congress host mobile office hours. That's the direction that it should be going, not just having one stationary office or two stationary offices, moving around and really trying to find the environment where the constituents are gathering, or like I said earlier, a target-rich environment where, in this particular situation, veterans gather at VA. It makes sense.
One of the things that my office engaged in was I know that congressional offices can obtain information about the veterans that they represent in the district. I'm pretty sure that that's a pretty standard sort of piece of information that congressional offices can obtain. And they can do mailings, not mailings, but they can do questionnaires via email about the services they have, the quality of the services that they have at the local VA, kind of a questionnaire or survey. I know that my office did that, and we got an idea of what our veteran constituents felt about the local VA service, but it also garnered quite a bit of inquiries about representation and advocacy, that it was a way for our office to engage with those veterans. And if there was anybody who scored the VA healthcare system in a very low matter, we called them up and said, what can we do to help you in this sort of situation? So I think that's another way in which we can try to engage veterans who may not be aware of the services or who are engaged with services and aren't quite happy with them. What do you think about that?
Well, sir, again, I think any medium that allows a member of Congress to reach out to their constituents is important. One thing from my time working in a district office for a member of Congress is that many constituents are not aware that a member of Congress can even help with these services. For the ability to be able to inquire, to sort of assist the VA in moving along and rendering a decision on a claim, many general citizens are not aware of those services that your office can assist with. So I think any way sharing that information with your constituents, particularly the veteran constituents, is a massive step in the right direction, sir.
I would add that personal interaction, though, goes a long way. So in addition to reaching out electronically, I think attending or participating locally within events, particularly where veteran population is.
Oh, I think I would agree with you. I think a combination of all hands on deck approach to try and reach out. Veteran advocacy is unfortunately one of the things that congressional offices have to do. And I say unfortunate because if we had a more well-functioning VA, it would imply that congressional offices wouldn't have to do so much advocacy. I just want to point out, it is true that at least 1/3. Do you know that at least 1/3 of the people employed at the VA are veterans themselves? Is that a number that you're familiar with?
I don't know what the exact number is, but I know there's quite a few employees that
My recollection is at least 1/3, and at least, you know, 1/3 of the workforce, frontline, non-managerial employees are members of an employee union. And I want to differ somewhat. I mean, I do think that with my colleague from Florida, and casting aspersions on union employees, a lot of what the union does is defend veteran employees and who need due process. And I certainly believe that veterans of all people who fought for our country also fought for important workplace employment rights, and they deserve it just as many as any other employee. And to the extent that there is office space available for them, I think that it's appropriate.
Thank you very much, Mr. Takano. Any further questions from the panel? All right. Thank you all. Thank you all for participating in this hearing. If there are no further questions, the second panel is now excused. I ask unanimous consent that all members have 5 legislative days to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material, and without objection, that is so ordered. This hearing is now adjourned.